Afternoon. It appears the first year of school is officially in the books. And I wanted to report today on the STAR end of course exams for high school, the results of those exams. That's high school is Algebra 1, English 1, English 2, Biology, and U.S. History. At this press avail, we're going to talk about end of course exams, STAR data. I'm not going to be taking questions about other things. I promise you at the end of next week, we will do that. We'll have another press avail, and you can ask me whatever you want about other things. But today we're going to focus on the STAR results. Just for context, the state gives out early preliminary data, and then final data. We have preliminary data for the high schools, so we can give out with fair confidence our results for those exams that I just mentioned. The state will give its results, or release its results, I believe, on the 7th, which is Friday. But that's, that's their results. We will not report out their results, so please, if you have any state results or see any state results, please do not report that out. That's embargoed until the 7th. HISD's data, though, the results I'm going to show you today can be used, of course, and of course anything I say can be used or printed. All right, so I don't know how many people are used to the STAR. I'm just going to give you a brief overview. You've already had it, but if anybody else does not know the STAR, this is just a real quick overview. If you already know this, just ignore it then. The STAR exams are a valid and reliable assessment, but they're only given once a year. So it's a snapshot of how our kids are doing on proficiency. We also use other data to determine how well our kids are doing. Data such as the NWEA MAP assessments. So we're going to report out on that snapshot in just a second. Students get a score, does not meet, approaches, meets or exceeds, and then exceeds. So there's actually 4 different scores for a district following those categories. We focus on meets or exceeds because that's where the proficiency bar is. Last year, the district, the past administration reports out on approaches. We will report out the information on approaches, but we're not going to cover it. It's a lower bar. The higher bar, the higher expectation is meets and exceeds. Also, there's always the question about what is a good score. And that really depends on a lot of variables, but one variable it depends on is the number of students in your sample size, or in your distribution. If you're a state, you have hundreds of thousands of students taking this exam. The variability from year to year is not going to be so high. If you had one classroom with 25 kids, you can imagine the variability being much higher. So for a district our size, one would think that 3 percentage points or more is a good score. 4 or 5 is, 5 and above is a great score for a district this size. For 1 or 2 points improvement, then that's a satisfactory score. And when I give those numbers, it's compared to last year. So how many percentage points did we grow on meets and exceeds? Okay, so that's when we're going to spend a lot of time talking about growth points, percentage points. Overall proficiency is a different number. You'll get those numbers as well. But the focus for us, since we're behind and we have to catch up and take our schools out of D and F status, we're looking at the growth from one year to the next. Do you want me to take a minute or? Okay. And then finally, I've said this before, I'll say it again. STAR data is important. It's also the data that we're going to use for TEA's accountability rating. But 1 year of data on STAR doesn't make a trend, and we need to look at a longer period of time. This is not a 1 year thing. Even though I'm about to tell you how great the scores are this year, there will be no mission accomplishment signs around this building anywhere. We're going to celebrate our results for kids and teachers because they did a great job, but we got a lot more work to do. So after we celebrate a little bit, we're going to get right back to work. So with that, let me talk about how our kids did. So the headline for me is the students and teachers did great. Really good job. It's one of the highest years of academic growth the district has ever experienced. And I'm just talking about end of course exams for high school, but I'm give you a teaser or preview. The 3 through 8 data you're going to find out is even stronger. So a great year for the district and especially for our kids. The NES schools, the new education system schools, because I know a lot of people are interested in whether or not that program, that model of instruction works. And you'll see in a minute, as I show you the data, NES schools, new education system schools, scored almost twice what the average district student did. So they had unbelievable results. Next week, we'll be talking about the 3rd grade through 8th grade results. And you're going to see results in those grades in reading and math. That's probably the highest growth of any urban district in the history of Texas. Number 3, the bullet point is we are narrowing the achievement gap. It's only been 1 year. You cannot close a 35-point gap or a 40-point gap in some cases overnight. But moving it several percentage points, that's a good thing for both our African-American students or black students and also our Hispanic students. And then finally, by way of preamble, these results far exceeded expectations for 1 year's growth. We knew that we would get some movement, but our students and our teachers exceeded expectations on the STAR exam. So these are the results right here. I'll take a little bit of time explaining this graph. So you can see what we did last year. This is meets or exceeds. So this is the percent of students who are proficient or higher. So you can see we're still low on our proficiency. We're at 39 percentage points of the students are proficient in Algebra 1, right? That's what that chart says. But we grew from last year to this year 5 percentage points. And then you can see the rest of it. We grew 3 percentage points in English 1, 5 in English 2, and 14 in biology. We remained flat in U.S. history. One might ask, are these good? How would you know they're good compared to the state? The state will release its data on Friday or the 7th, but I can tell you we outperformed by quite a bit the state data, so you'll have to wait to see exactly how much. The other thing, the middle set of data on this slide shows the NES schools. And I want you to focus on that green column because that shows you how much they improved, how much they grew from 1 year to the next. And you can see it's almost twice what the district grew, except in biology. It was better than biology, but 14 points for this district is incredible. 18 points for NES is even more and more so. And while we were flat in U.S. history as a district, the NES schools that were high schools grew 5 points. So they grew 5. You can see that our NES schools outperformed our non-NES schools, but the whole district did well. I want to point that out. It's not just all about NES, it's also about the entire district, and the entire district did well. This graph is just a graphic representation of this. And it just shows the difference, the improvement, right? So you can see graphically the green bars are HISD, that's us. So that's a good score. Those green bars are positive. That's good. compared to the state, we outperformed. I think you're also going to find out Friday when you hear other people's scores that we're an outlier, positive outlier with regard to other large urbans. In other words, we did so much better than other large urban districts in the state of Texas. In any case, the data that you have in front of you, the green bar is HISD, the blue bar is non-NES schools, so still positive, still good, still better than the state, but the yellow bar is NES. And so that's, and I'll remind the audience that we have 85 NES schools, 275 total schools, 274 total schools. This is our algebra scores. We've got a lot more data, but I'm just going to go through this quickly. Algebra 1, we gained 5 points. And I think we're going to send this to you electronically, so you'll have it. English 1, we regained percent. We scored a 3-point increase, but that's more than the pre-COVID years. So we are back to pre-COVID levels, actually higher than pre-COVID levels. English 2, also back to pre-COVID levels, actually higher than pre-COVID levels. Not the highest in the last 6 years, but pretty close. Biology, we have already talked about, huge gains in biology. You can see that we were declining, but now we jump back up, and we are at pre-COVID levels there too. And then U.S. history, again, is mentioned as flat, the same as pre-COVID levels. Last slide, and then I'll take questions. We take our testing seriously, of course. If you've been in the schools with me, you know that even what we call demonstrations of learning, those mini tests, have to have a test environment. No talking, everybody's quiet, everybody's focused on their own work. They put up screens sometimes so that kids, even on this mini quiz, which is a daily quiz in math and language arts, we have a testing environment. So we made sure of that. All of our schools had that. Still, beyond the test security requirements, we have staff trained and trained in proctoring and monitoring exams. That's a state requirement anyway. And then we have immediate reporting of any irregularities. And after if there's a need for investigation, we investigate any misconduct or breach of test security, and those results are reported to and reviewed by TEA. We do our own data validation. So we make sure that our data, so the data you saw here matches TEA's data. We actually get the data from TEA. And then there's a cross-check. And so TEA validates their data as well so that we have the same data and reporting the same data. The third column here, the analysis of outliers, is really key. We do this on our own, not just my administration, past administrations have done this too. If there is an outlier, so most scores are going to be within one standard deviation of the mean, and so schools that have scores outside that one standard deviation, we're going to check to see if there's anything untoward, and we're going to look for any anomalies in that way. So we're already checking the data just to make sure that it's as valid as possible and there's no outliers. And if there is an outlier, what's the reason for that score being out of this one standard deviation? And then test validity. Of course, the STAR exam is one of the most reliable and valid tests. It's been worked on for a number of years. And so the state does statistical analysis that's required by the federal government to ensure test validity. So all of these things give us confidence that these results are strong, or these results are accurate and reliable. Let me close by saying, you know, it's been a tough year, a lot of changes, a lot of new systems and a lot of new practices for students, for teachers, and our principals. And the community also felt some of that change, some of that angst. And yet, as you can see, the overwhelming majority of our kids had a good experience academically, and the overwhelming majority of our teachers and principals and students stepped up and engaged the process and came in with some of the highest scores that the district has ever seen, despite the changes. So that means that the teachers and the principals actually embraced what was going on, and they, because kids take their cues from teachers, and they stepped up. So very proud of our teachers, very proud of our principals. We got a long way to go, but today is a time for celebration for our students, for our teachers and principals. It's a time for celebration, a time for dancing. And then tomorrow we're going to get right back to work to try to ensure that next year is just as good as experience as we had this year. Who has the first question?
When we're talking about like numbers, you mentioned the growth there. Can you talk to us, when we're talking about 43, what is that out of? And you mentioned that it's better than the states?
Yeah, so do you mind if I move, or do you want me to stay back here? Okay, so I'll stay in one place. So the proficiency scores, every number that you see is out of 100 points. And so when you get the state number, you have a better chance to compare. So yes, the proficiency is not where we need it to be. So when I say in Algebra 1, the district's at 39% proficient, that's not where we want to be. In the end, we've got to compete with our peers outside of Houston and actually outside of Texas too. So we've got to grow that proficiency. And so we already know we're behind, but we're closing that gap with the state. That's what these results show.
Ideally, what number would you want to be at?
Yeah, so ideally I want to be above the state average, number one, and then number two, I want to be well above every other large urban district.
Is there a number you can put on that?
So depending on the test, if you look at the national average on reading proficiency or math proficiency, the nation's white students are performing around the 65th percentile. So all of our kids, including our white students who are already performing somewhere around there, we want all of our kids, the average, to be at that percentile.
For this first year, were these gains where you expected the district to reach at, obviously just for the high school we're talking about right now, or did you have a higher bar, and I guess for one more year, what are you looking for next year?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. I knew we would grow, but I didn't expect results like this. I think this is more than expected. Because sometimes when you have a big organization and you do whole-scale reform, which is comprehensive changes all at one time, you might even get an implementation dip, right? Anybody who's run a larger organization doing a massive overhaul, sometimes you stall out and before you can go back up. And so that's why we were optimistic, but also realistic that, we're not going to change things overnight. It's a big ship to turn and get going in the right direction. So to have these sorts of results, it means kids rose to the level of expectation. It's like Jaime Escalante with the kids in algebra in California, where he set a bar up here and they rose to that level of expectation. So going forward though, next year, what can we expect? I believe we'll get gains next year also. Not only are we going to add schools, 45 schools to the NES program, but we have more time, more school days. We have already a lot of experience with NES. It won't be as disruptive because people are already used to it. Even the schools that are joining are kind of used to some things. We won't have as much change because we've already done the major change, and so my guess is we'll have as good a results next year as we had this year.
And with adding more NES schools, you're obviously going to have a larger data set there. And obviously there's a twice as large of an average. So do you think maybe that may decrease next year because it's just you have a wider pool of data?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very nuanced. Let me try to answer it though, just simply. If the 45 schools grow like the other NES schools, and if, and this is part of your question, if the 85 schools, original ones, continue to maintain, then we will see district-wide growth. I want to remind you that, again, because I don't want it to seem like it's all NES, our non-NES schools also did well. They grew this year. So that's a good thing, and we expect them to do the same thing next year.
Can you talk about the parameters? You said that this year compared to last year, y'all had different expectations, or how you measured it.
Yeah, it's not that we measure differently. Oh, you're talking about approaches and meets. Yeah, sorry. Again, the district did not meet. What percentage of kids did not meet? What percentage of kids are approaching? What percentage of kids meets or exceeds? And then what percentage of kids exceeds expectations? So meets or exceeds expectations and exceeds expectations. So this number encompasses both. And what I was saying earlier is that the last administration and many districts across the state report on approaches, and they celebrate if approaches goes up because it gets you closer to proficiency, meets and exceeds. The problem with focusing on this is, one, you should be focusing on proficiency, which is a higher bar. The second problem is this: if the approaches number goes from 50 to 40, is that good or bad? It's like if the number of C's in your report card goes from this number to this number, is that good or bad? Well, the answer is it's good if the difference is seen in the B's and A's. If the difference is seen in the D's and F, then that's not a good thing. So that's why we're focused on meets and exceeds. I hope that wasn't too confusing for people.
So Rick, you're all about the new grading system. How much do you think that helped?
It's not so much a new grading system, it's a new instructional model. Is that what you mean, the NES? I think it helped a lot. One of the things about the new education system is that it differentiates instruction. So for those, and I don't want to be confusing to any of your audience, but you can cut it. There's direct instruction for 45 minutes, and there's a 10-minute, what we call demonstration of learning. That's a mini quiz. But the most important part is that kids are separated into 4 groups. The kids who are proficient and accelerated leave the classroom and go to an area like that, a team center, and they work on harder material at their level, harder material. The kids who are almost proficient, like approaches, and who are still learning the objective, they stay with the teacher in the classroom and get more guided instruction. My point is this: every kid then gets more time if they need it, or accelerated material if they need to be challenged. And I think that has helped.
With your first year in the books, what have you learned yourself, and other than adding new schools and a few other touches, what can you improve on for the next year?
Oh, well, there's a lot to improve on. There's a lot of things in hindsight we would have done a little bit differently, but we're really happy about what we were able to accomplish. So a couple things we're going to improve on by way of these scores, because I don't want to talk too much about other things not related to the test scores, is the curriculum. So the curriculum is strong. In the curriculum, a lot of teachers are using, even if they're not in NES. So the curriculum focus, the curricular focus that we had this year is a good thing. However, we need to make sure that the content that we're teaching, not just the skills in our subjects like language arts and math, that the content is kind of a consistent or aligned interdisciplinary. So for example, if we're going to do something in reading around heart disease or how the circulatory system works, then maybe in science we talk about the same topic. In English they get a text, an article about it. In math they have some story problems about pulse or something like that, right? So that the content is interdisciplinary. We need to do a much better job than that, because over the long haul, this will get kids to masters instead of just meets. So we're going to do that. This is not directly related, but I'm going to answer your question anyway, and then I'm going to move off that topic because I want to stick to results, is our defined autonomy system. So one of the things we didn't do well, I didn't do well, is we didn't clarify what autonomies are A and B schools. The schools that are already doing well, you'll see this in the data when we get down to school level data. The schools that are doing well, A and B schools, are still A and B schools for the most part. And we didn't clarify what autonomies they would have and what the impact of any of these instructional changes would be. We need to do a better job clarifying that.
And to confirm, so that difference in approaching grade level, it is going to the meets grade level, or did the do not meet grade level share of students, did that grow between this year and last year?
Yeah, we're only, thanks for asking and allowing me to clarify. What we're talking about here and in the charts and our focus is the percentage of kids who were, the percentage of students, of all students that were proficient in algebra or English 1 or English 2, right? Proficient, meaning meets or exceeds. And did the number of kids, the percentage of kids, grow from last year to this year? We're still, when we break down the data, not just STAR, because STAR's at one point in time, when we look at NWA, and if a kid's in a does not meet, yes, we're going to try to get that student to be more proficient too, and that's how we do every day. I mean, we look at interventions, we look at kids who are not proficient, who are still learning the objective, and then we try to bring them closer to proficiency. So while the data is only about this, we have a whole bunch of data that we're using. Again, not just STAR, because STAR is just one data point. We have to look at NWA, these DOLs, and all that to move a kid from here to here. Does that make sense? You want to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, so to confirm, the amount or the percentage of students that that did not meet grade level, that did not increase between last year and this year?
I don't have the data in front of me because we're looking at proficiency, but my guess is just because so many kids became proficient, that of course this number would grow smaller.
We got one more question. For someone who might not be familiar with STAR test, you talked about why it's so important. Can you clarify the number of NES schools and how many more you'd like to add?
Yeah, so this year we had 85 NES schools, elementary, middle, and high, all total, 85. The district has 274 schools total, so NES was about a third of all the schools. Next year, we're hoping to add 45 additional NES schools, bringing the total to 130. Does that answer? Okay.
Just the STAR testing part of it, just why it's so important for somebody who might be viewing this.
Yeah, so again, I want to be clear. STAR test is important, but it's only one point in time. So we use the STAR as a gauge. Are we in the right direction? are schools doing well? What is their point in time assessment of their effectiveness and their proficiency? So that's important. But it's even more important to look at STAR and see trends. So over time, if you see your, I don't know, Algebra 1 going down, then the question is, what instructionally can you do about that? And so the STAR helps with that trend data. And that's why I'm always careful to say, look, this is good, but until I see a trend, I'm not, I can't turn the ship too much one way or the other until I see a trend, or until I see a really gross increase or decrease. Then you can say, well, wait a minute, there's something here that you should address. So luckily we had positive trends or positive scores. We do think we're starting to see a trend because our NWA middle of the year was good, our STAR is good, and our NWA end of year, which we just finished last week, and I have preliminary data, is also good. So that's the start of a trend.
All right. I think that might be it. We did have one more question, but it doesn't have to do with STAR. So
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that. I promise you, we're going to have something, press avail at the end of next week, and then you can ask me anything you want about anything, okay?
I have a question.
About STAR?
I am the results this year. For those watching this and just wondering, with all the success this year, what might that tell us about what the future holds for the district in terms of how long the state takeover lasts?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because in the end of the day, the STAR exams are a big part of the accountability metric, the A, B, C, D, F rating. And the task at hand is to get 123 schools out of DNF status and not have any new schools join DNF status. So over time, we've got to have 0. So the STAR, these results at least give us some, suggest that we're going to be able to move many schools out of that DNF status this year, right? When we get the accountability ratings this summer, I don't know what they'll be, but we're going to run some analysis soon and see what we think it's going to be. My guess is that a number of those 123 schools will be out of DNF status, or at least if they were F, they moved to D, or F moved to C, or D moved to C. So we're going to see good movement of these schools because of the growth in STAR. How long? I don't know, but maybe this suggests that we can get out of intervention status sooner rather than later. Hopefully it won't take 7 or 8 years. Maybe now it'll only take a few years to start the transition. If we keep a growth like this, we'll be able to transition out into an elected board soon, okay? If we keep this kind of growth going.
All right. I think that wraps it up, Superintendent Miles.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.